Alright guys, so we're back, and today what we're doing is we're taking a look at Manifest Destiny. So we should have finished up the Jackson videos and taken a look, and the one thing I want you to remember about that is that as the age of Jackson is continuing on, we still have people pushing further and further to the west, and a lot of times they are kind of leaving the area of the United States and settling in territories that we kind of claim but aren't necessarily ours completely. The Oregon Trail is probably the best explanation of that. That area that Lewis and Clark has explored, we have Americans moving into it, even though technically we don't own it just yet. We exert, or we say that we have a right to it, even though we don't have the deed in our hand. So let's take a look at what this word actually means. Manifest Destiny, we're going to see it multiple times during our course, especially next semester when we start taking a look at American imperialism and how Manifest Destiny works after we have the country essentially put together. But Manifest Destiny is this idea that America was always destined by God to stretch from the Atlantic to the Pacific coast, that we were always supposed to have what we have now. Some of that is kind of looking back and saying, oh yeah, well, of course we were supposed to have all of that because we have it now. But another part of it is that it's kind of driving the decisions that our leaders are making. We know we want more land, and we know we want it to spread and get to the Pacific coast. And we'll talk about reasons why the Pacific coast is going to be so important in a minute. It really has to do with trade. But the obstacles that are going to stand in the way of this Manifest Destiny are going to be the geography, just the vastness of the continent, and there's not really much there as far as established human populations with cities that are already set up for us to use. We're having to kind of create a lot of this out of the rugged wilderness. The natives are going to be out there, and they're definitely not going to want this encroachment onto their territory. Neighboring countries, so Spain and then Mexico, they are trying to hold on to the West, and we wanted to kind of rip it from their hands. The British, the Russians, are both going to be players in this kind of idea as well. And also there's internal division of whether we should be pushing our borders to the West, or whether we should be doing it as fast as we will accomplish it. There's an idea of why are we buying all this land that we're not going to use for 50 years, maybe 60 years, maybe a century. Why are we going to put all that money? We could get it for cheaper later. Who knows? The other issue is the other issue we'll get to at the end. The other issue is going to have to deal with the division and internal division that's already in America, but it's going to be amplified by our push west. So I want to go back to Manifest Destiny again, and this is probably the best picture that can summarize Manifest Destiny. This is a painting called American Progress by a painter named Thomas Gast in the 1840s. And the name of it, a lot of people call it the Manifest Destiny picture because it does a really good job of expressing the ideas behind Manifest Destiny. But it is not, the title is American Progress. So that's kind of another thing to highlight too. This idea of Manifest Destiny is all about progress. Progressing the country into a great nation. Progressing the territory into civilization. And progressing, moving further west and further west. So taking a look at this painting, the person in the middle, a lot of people when I kind of cover this call her an angel, because they think these are wings. If you technically take a look at what it is, it's a robe. But she is floating. She is above the ground. So a lot of people kind of refer to as an angel. If Thomas Gast mentions that this is Columbia, the personification of America. So this is Columbia moving in the direction of the west. You can kind of see the leading edge of civilization. Another thing with this painting is it has dark areas and it has a light area. The dark area is to the west, the light area is behind Columbia, where she's already been. So another concept with this painting is that Columbia brightens makes everything better, shines a light wherever she goes. Now, how she does that: telegraph lines, railroads, stagecoaches, houses, structured fields with the steel plow, John Deere down there. In the background, you see cities and a bridge and all these ships, along the Mississippi River, a riverboat. All right, so all these things, all these technologies we've already mentioned, are bringing about this progress that Columbia is bringing. Now, in front of her, the things that have to be kind of swept away, the natives and the stampeding buffalo, and then you have the mountains in the background. And just at the edge of the painting, you can kind of see the Gulf, the West Coast, the Pacific Coast. And all of this movement, if you take a look at all this movement, it's all moving west. There's only one thing, for some reason, there's only one thing that's moving in a different direction, and that's this elk down here, which is kind of running southeast. So this is the map of the 50 states and the rivers. A lot of these borders are going to be focused on the rivers. And if we take a look at what we have at the time, this is the border, rough border. Let's kind of change this a little bit. So it's better to see. And let's kind of increase it in size. That's essentially the border in 1793. And let's throw in a rough border for the Louisiana. Nope, we don't want to do that. Here goes a rough border. Again, let's kind of change the color, change the size. That's kind of the rough border for after the Louisiana Purchase. So we still have this good amount of territory here left to add to the Union. And that's what we're focusing on today. So 1803, just kind of reviewing really quickly with the Louisiana Purchase. We really want New Orleans because we want to kind of shore up our claim to the Mississippi River and make sure nobody can restrict us from using our river. We see it as our river. So we're going to buy New Orleans, but then Napoleon's going to offer us the rest of the Louisiana Purchase for $15 million. We buy it, 828 million acres for $15 million, less than 3 cents an acre. Awesome deal. Doubles the size of the United States. We're going to have issues coming up very soon with this territory. The Adams-Onís Treaty, remember in our lecture about Jackson, he's going to essentially invade Spanish Florida to go after escaped slaves, runaway slaves, and Seminole Indians that have been kind of endangering the Georgia, Alabama area. And since we invaded, we've got a crisis on our hands of whether we can fight Spain for Florida or whether we buy it. We were already involved in trying to purchase it, so we were going to buy it for $5 million in 1819. We're going to give up some of our claims in the Texas area that we gotten through the Louisiana Purchase. Some of these areas right along in here, we're going to be giving that back to Spain and say, yep, nope, we don't own that. That's yours as long as we get Florida. Plus $5 million to give you, we get Florida. Now, very soon after we have this Louisiana Purchase, there are going to be people starting to move into that territory. Louisiana is already almost, at the time, ready to come in as a state. Now, what we've been trying to do every time we add a state is add them two at a time. There's a perfectly good reason for that. If you remember back to the Three-Fifths Compromise, when we started this country, it was all about trying to balance North and South, slave state, free state. And that's going to be in Congress, in the House of Representatives. But there was something else going on, too. The House of Representatives can be balanced by the Three-Fifths Compromise, but that's going to start to fall apart once this industrial North starts to have more people. Still, the South is going to want to maintain some power so that their economy is not endangered by an abolitionist North. So the only way they can do that is to make sure that in the Senate, their power is equal to, or roughly equal to, the North. So every time we add a slave state, we're going to add a free state to balance it in the Senate. That way, if Congress wants to try to abolish slavery, the only way they can do that is with Senate approval. And this is a way for the South to say, hey, we're not going to stand for that. This is a way for them to kind of block that. So every time we've added a slave state, we've added a free state, and every time we've added a free state, we've had a balancing slave state on there. The issue is going to be in 1820 when Missouri is ready to come into the Union. It's the first territory in this Louisiana Purchase, that's not Louisiana, that's ready to come into the Union. And the question is going to be whether Missouri should come into the Union as a free state or a slave state. Up to this point, it's been very convenient. We have the Mason-Dixon line at the Pennsylvania-Maryland border, and then from there, the difference between slave state and free state has been a river, the Ohio River. But now the question is going to be, west of the Mississippi, where do we draw that line, slave state, free state? So Missouri's ready to come into the Union. There's only one problem. There's no free territory that is ready, has enough people to become a state. So what are we to do? Are we to keep Missouri out of the Union just because we don't have a free state to balance it? And the solution is going to be lovely and simplistic, but also sets up further problems. The issue is going to be, again, balancing Missouri. So what we're going to do is we're going to take Maine over here, which doesn't exist just yet, and we're going to split it off of Massachusetts. Massachusetts had claims to Maine, and they had functioned as one state up to 1820. Now we're going to go ahead and break Maine off of Massachusetts, let them have their own state, so we don't have these two portions of Massachusetts. And then that gives us that free state to balance Missouri. We don't want to have this problem again. We want to come up with a permanent solution. So we draw a line at the 3630 line. This is the most controversial line drawn in American history. Above that line, you're going to have free territory. Below that line is going to be open to slavery. Now, if you take a look at this map, one thing should be very obvious about this compromise. Who's actually winning out on the territory? This or all of this. The free territory is going to be much larger than the slave territory. But the South is going to agree to this through the Senate. The North is going to agree to it, so that is what we have. The only problem is that with these plantations, now that they have the cotton gin, and now that we are kind of going full steam and just growing cotton, it's going to strip all the nutrients out of the ground. So with these plantations, to keep them going, they're going to have to move in search of better soil. They have to keep moving west, moving west, moving west. Now all of this territory has been stopped from their cotton fields. Whether cotton would grow really well up there or not, it's kind of not as debated at the time, but the option isn't even there anymore. So as we start pushing these plantations further and further west, there's less territory for them to kind of grow into, which starts people thinking, is the North trying to strangle out slavery? But just when it kind of looks like this Missouri Compromise has turned out very badly for the South, they do something relatively unexpected. Right. New Spain down here, right, Spanish territory, has now gained its independence as Mexico. And Mexico has some problems with its northern frontier. They're continually having raids from these natives on their ranches that are stealing horses and stealing cows. And they want to kind of shore up that frontier. The way you shore up a frontier is by getting more settlement. The easy way for more settlement to occur in their northern frontier, which essentially is Tejas and Coachella, is going to be invite immigrants in. That's a quick way to do it. Now, the immigrants that they are going to invite into their country are going to be American Southerners. They know American Southerners want space to kind of grow their plantations. So at first, Mexico is going to invite American Southerners into Texas, give them very nice land claims. As long as they move there and as long as they shore up and keep the natives from attacking Mexico, they're going to be allowed to keep their slaves. They're going to be allowed to practice Protestantism and not Catholicism. And they're going to be allowed to have trade with the United States, pretty open, liberal trade. The only issue for that is you're going to have a new person involved in Mexico very soon. So Stephen F. Austin is going to gather up Tennesseans, Alabamians, Mississippians, Louisianans, North Carolinians, and get them to move in kind of large groups to Texas to take advantage of this. Now, these people have been born in America, they speak English, they see themselves as Americans, but this is an opportunity for them to take. And this is interesting because this is one of the only ones, at least the only one I can think of, where Americans immigrate or leave the United States. When we talk about immigration, almost all the time it's people coming to the United States for different reasons, but they're coming to the United States. This is the only time that I know of in which you have a mass amount of American citizens moving out of the country. And the draw is for land claims in Texas and for them to kind of build up plantations there. The only problem, though, is that Mexico is an early republic, and they have a lot of governmental turmoil. We did as well. Remember, the Articles of Confederation failed. But they are going to have almost a dictator, and you can say he is a dictator, emerge. A guy named Santa Anna, Maria de Lopez de Santa Anna. Antonio Maria de Lopez de Santa Anna. He's a military guy. He takes power, and he's going to repeal that Constitution, which it protected the rights of Texans to slavery, to practicing Protestantism, to being able to trade with Louisiana and all those American territories really easily. And when he does that, Texas revolts. Other Mexican territories revolt as well. The Yucatan, and a few other. I think there's actually 18 different states that are going to revolt against Santa Anna. Most of those revolutions or revolts are put down very easily. Texas is not. And one of the things that Santa Anna is going to do to try to make sure Texas and Chile kind of submits is tries to take their militias, weapons away, including a cannon. I'm trying to remember the town's name, but instead of giving that cannon over, they are ready to fire that cannon when the Mexican authorities come to take it. So that's where you get the flag come and take it from. So with this revolution, there's got to be a military leader for the Texas side. That guy's going to be Sam Houston. And he has got to cobble together an army to protect against a much more organized Mexican force. At the Alamo, probably the most well-known battle of this war is going to be the Alamo. The Alamo is basically going to be almost a suicide mission from the start. It is a mission, a church in present-day San Antonio, where Texan forces are going to set up in, and they're going to be surrounded by the Mexican army. And they're going to hold the Mexican army at bay for days and days on end. They know essentially there's no escape, and eventually the Mexican army will rush in and kill essentially everybody in that mission. Some women and children are going to survive, but all the fighters are killed. But the Alamo is going to buy time for Sam Houston. While the Alamo is going on, Santa Anna's army is concentrated there, while Sam Houston can recruit more soldiers. And when they go into the next battles, he's going to be yelling out, Remember the Alamo. Right? The last battle of the war is going to be the Battle of San Jacinto. The Mexican army is stationed at a river, easily defensible area, so they set up a camp. They're protected on three sides by this river. The only possible attack can come through this field of high grass, and they believe that they will be able to defend themselves in a battle really easily. The problem for the Mexican army is that Sam Houston's army is going to crawl through that high grass and is going to surprise them while they're still kind of sitting around cooking breakfast. The Mexican army runs, but there's nowhere for them to run to. You have those rivers that they have to swim across, so they're going to be captured. Santa Anna is actually going to try to escape posing as a private, posing as a lowly soldier, but he's going to be given up when, upon questioning, everybody kind of cuts their eyes to Santa Anna, this somebody that they shouldn't really be kind of taking a look at. And you have colonels, you have other guys that are, like, when they're answering these questions, they're kind of looking over at Santa Anna as if to say, hey, how do you want me to answer this? And then they finally realize that Santa Anna that they put a sword up to his neck and force him to sign the Treaty of Alaska, which gives Texas its independence. The only problem with that is that since that treaty is signed under the threat of death, in international law, it would not hold up weight. But this is the Wild West, essentially. Santa Anna has to leave. And when he gets back to Mexico, he says that we still have Texas, even though the rebels are in control over it. They still are ours. We're just going to get them back later. Texas immediately pushes to become part of the United States. The only issue is the same issue we've had with Missouri. If we allow Texas to come into the Union, the original plan is that Texas is going to be broken up into 5 different states. If that happens, it's 5 different states that we don't have free state balance for. So Northerners are definitely going to block Texas becoming part of the United States. So for 10 years, Texas is going to be its own independent country until James K. Polk is going to be elected. When Polk is elected, one of his campaign promises was that we are going to annex Texas, no matter what Mexico says about it. So before he can become president, Congress goes ahead and annexes Texas. So now we have Texas added to the Union. We have another piece of that puzzle. The problem, though, is Mexico hasn't given up their claim on Texas. And they are also going to be concerned about where that southern border of Texas is as well. So we'll go back to that in a second. At the same time, our northern border, we're trying to shore up that northern border with England. Right? They have Canada, and so we're trying to figure out what that northern border looks like. Over here in Maine and in the New Brunswick, Quebec area, there's a concern, there's overlapping claims. So we're trying to figure out what that should look like. So the Webster-Ashburton Treaty is going to draw the lines. Where Canada ends, where the United States begins. Because we've had some shootings here between our two countries. We don't want that to boil over into a full war. Now, out in Oregon, it's kind of the same issue. We claim territory all the way up to 5440, which is basically southern Alaska. We've done that even though we have actually nothing really hard and fast claim, is that we're claiming that this is going to be the United States eventually. This is the west of the Rocky Mountains. We're going to have to have a western window onto the Pacific Ocean. We want to trade with Asia as well as Europe. So to do that, we need to have a good deepwater port. Over here in the Seattle, Vancouver area is where we're looking. But to kind of safeguard and make sure those territories are what we're going to get, we're going to claim all the way up to 5440. Britain claims all the way down to 42 degrees, so that would be the southern border of Oregon today, is where they're claiming. So instead of fighting this thing out, cooler heads prevail. There's also another issue going on with that, is because we're about to fight a war with Mexico, and we don't want to be fighting two wars at the same time. So we decide to negotiate with Britain. And what we'll do is we'll split the area. You can have north of the 49th parallel, we'll have below the 49th parallel. It doesn't make everybody happy, but it is going to be almost perfectly drawn. On one side of the line is going to be Seattle, a good deep water port that's going to give us trade to Asia. And on the other side, you're going to have what will become Vancouver, the same thing, but for Canada. So cooler heads prevail. We have the 49th parallel, which is essentially what we had already had over here east of the Rockies. We're just kind of continuing that line west of the Rockies. Now, the people who had been pushing for us to get 5440 are going to actually be the Northerners, because this is going to allow more manufacturing, more exports to Asia. This isn't going to have much to do with the South. The South is really wanting to go to war with Mexico, gain more territory down there. So this green area here, so we have Texas and we've annexed it now. But even if Mexico allows the idea that we could annex Texas, there's a dispute of where Texas begins. Does it begin at the Rio Grande River, or does it begin at the Nueces River? Mexico is going to claim that it's the Nueces River, and Texas is going to say it's the Rio Grande River. That's not that much distance between the two rivers, but if you take a look at the impact of that, all this in the green is going to be the territory that's affected by that dispute. So to shore up our claim that this is going to be the Rio Grande River is the southern terminus or the southern border of the United States, Polk is going to send soldiers down to the Rio Grande River. Now to us, they are Americans on American soil protecting America from Mexico. To Mexico, they've just crossed the line, they're now Mexican territory, and they've invaded. So of course Mexico is going to see that as a complete insult, and are going to send soldiers to kind of push the Americans out. There's going to be shots fired, Americans are going to die, and it's going to be posed as Americans have died defending American soil from Mexico. On Mexico's side, it's basically Mexicans have died keeping the intruders out. So we're on to war. From the beginning, this is going to be one, a divisive war, and two, a war in which Mexico really has no hopes of winning. They just have to stand up, or else the entirety of their country is going to be taken eventually. And this is how the war goes. This is essentially the movements of the war and where we're going. Very early on, we're going to send a force by a guy named Fremont over to California. Californios are going to be English-speaking Americans who have moved to California. They're very few, but they are going to organize and they're going to revolt against the Mexican Empire. Empire is kind of loosely used there. But Fremont is going to organize that rebellion, and they're going to go around and they're going to fight a few battles, and California is going to become independent of Mexico. At the same time, we're going to be invading from Texas, and we're going to start amphibious invasions along the Mexican coast. Veracruz, Tampico, Veracruz down here is going to be the biggest one. And from Veracruz, it's a quick kind of march to Mexico City. We capture Mexico City pretty quickly. One of the more interesting stories of this is we're having more Irish immigration to the United States, and during the war there's actually going to be a unit of Irish Americans who were recruited right off the boat to go fight against Mexico. Once they get down to Mexico, they actually turn sides. This war is going to be very brutal. Sometimes the American soldiers are doing things that they really should not do as far as moral standards, but again, war. So the San Patricios, the St. Patrick's Brigade, decides to switch to the Mexican side. Now, when the U.S. Army finds them, they're going to hang every one of them for desertion. But at the end of the day, we capture Mexico City, the war is going to be over, glorious American victory, and we get to set the terms of the treaty. We have your capital. If you want to keep fighting this war, we're all more than ready to do that. All of our soldiers are in your territory. But let's go ahead and get this treaty knocked out. Mexico agrees, so we're going to pay $15 million. But in return for that $15 million in this war, we're going to get California, Nevada, Utah, part of Colorado, part of Wyoming, part of New Mexico, most of Arizona. For $15 million, we've added another large piece of the puzzle. There's only one other piece of the puzzle remaining. Now again, this war is going to be very controversial. The North never wanted to fight the Mexican-American War. Because from the beginning, the big idea is that this territory is being added to the United States to give slavery an area to expand into. During the war, the North is going to propose multiple times a thing called the Wilmot Proviso. We'll talk about this more later. But that would have banned slavery in any of these territories that we get from Mexico, and it's going to be blocked every time. Now, Gadsden Purchase is the last thing we've got to add to the United States for the 48 territories. It's the last piece of the Manifest Destiny. The Gadsden Purchase. The only reason why we're going to add this is we want to build eventually a transcontinental railroad along the southern area from Texas to California. A little bit further north of this, you're getting into more rugged, mountainous terrain. This territory in the purple is very good. It is desert, but the good thing about that desert is that it is flat. Perfect area to put a easy way to put a railroad in. So we buy it for $10 million. We put that last little piece of the puzzle together, and we have now Manifest Destiny completed. The big issue I'm going to leave you with is we've added all this territory. The big issue is going to be about slavery. Will slavery spread to the West? We're going to be taking a look at that in the next couple weeks as we push closer and closer to the American Civil War.